In this session, we will cover area lights used in 3D rendering. In X16, area lights were introduced. Area lights are emissive materials that produce light in GPU ray trace views. Any material set to be emissive, fireplaces, TV screens, light bulb glass, and vertical rope will produce light in views such as physically based render or PBR ray trace. Light is not produced in other camera views with the exception of clay ray trace. Since area lights are a surface like a TV screen versus a punctual light with a single light point such as a recessed can, they are called area lights. Now that you know area lights are emissive materials that produce light in GPU ray trace views, let's take a look at the settings and how you can optimize your 3D renderings. In this sample plan that I have open, the entire scene is lit using area lights, with the exception of the rope light that is underneath the cabinet above the sink. Let's take a look at a couple of the settings for the area lights. Using the Adjust Material Definition tool or the Rainbow tool, I'm going to come over and I'm going to click on our door logo, the bright blue portion. In the Define Material dialog, the panel that I'm after is on the Properties panel. And then toward the middle of the dialog is the category for emissivity. The setting is set to be 250. There's a number available from the drop-down. You can also type in a very specific number. Since there's an emissive value, this logo is emitting light in a ray trace scene. I mentioned earlier, it can either emit light in the physically based ray trace scene or in the clay ray trace scene. Immediately below the emissive material, apply emissivity and color from the lights. I'm going to talk about that when I go into another room scene. Effectively, that is using a light itself. In this case, I have a fluorescent light, and the program can use the emissivity from that light as well as the color for the area light. For the material, it's in a material class called General Material. Not all material classes can have emissivity. The General class has emissivity, the Translucent class has emissivity, and also the Transparent class has emissivity for the values. The other materials, there is no emissivity setting. So to set emissivity, make sure that you're using the correct material class for the material. In this case, by changing the material, notice that it had lost the emissivity. I'll just go ahead and set that back to the 250 for that Chief Architect logo. Now for this specific scene, let me reset the camera and let's start from the beginning and take a look at how to set the area lights. So I'm going to go ahead and use this Reset Camera setting. This is the beginning state for the 3D render that I began with. It's during the day, and you're going to notice that the fluorescent lights in the ceiling are on, and maybe a few other lights, maybe the rope light is on as well. In my rendering scenes, I will typically always use a light set. And I'm going to control this scene and delve into area lights using light sets. Let's make sure we know what we're talking about with the light sets. I'm going to come up into the Edit Active View tool. Toward the bottom of the dialog is using a light set. You can see that I've set mine up to be a garage. This is a larger house, and I like to control the lighting specifically by room or maybe by a grouping of rooms. You can see I have a bedroom and bath light set. The program, if you go into an automatic mode, will typically turn on, in this case, 20 lights, and that may not be the exact number of lights, or from the exact room, the program will choose which ones it thinks will best turn on. I find it's best to use a light set, and when I use a light set, you can come in here. Let's go ahead and click on the Adjust Lights for just a minute. And before I talk about all the different lights in here, you can see here are the names. You can make a copy of that, and then you can sort this based on room, and then turn on the different lights that you want. In this case, it's sorted by room, so as you scroll down, I have all the lights on, for the most part, for the garage in this specific light set. Now, for the area lights to look good, the first thing I'm going to want to do is turn off the sun that's coming through the windows. You can see a sunspot right in here. I want to get a nice pop with an evening or even night shot to get the area lights on. So what I've done in here is I've created a light set specifically, and I'm going to begin with limited lights. When I select this, I've only got two things that are going to be turned on. It's going to be my floor logo as well as the tail lights on the car. Then I'm going to also turn off the Use Sunlight option. So let's go ahead and close this and take a look at how the scene then updates. So this will take a minute. I've got it set to be 350 passes in here. So the only two lights that are set to be on in this case is the floor logo, which is an emissive material, and also the tail lights. So you can see that we have a little bit of pop out of those two things. Now as I go back into the Edit Active view, let's come down and let's switch that over to the garage with all area lights on, and let's take a look at how the scene is then going to update with all of these lights being turned on. You're going to notice that I have some neon signs on the back wall, I have a gas pump, I have a TV screen, I have a seating arrangement. I've turned some of the materials on to be emissive, and in the case for the floor logo, I have specifically turned that off to show the scene with the area lights. Area lights can add a lot into the scene. Let's pick on this gas pump back in here. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to use the tool to find in Library down here in my lower Edit toolbar. And I'm going to choose the gas pump itself, and then let's go ahead and find that in our library. Once the library opens, I'm already in that mode to place the gas can. Let's go ahead and place this in the middle of the room. There's a big difference between the one that I just placed and the one in the back. You see how the one in the back of the room has a nice glow to it? That's because I've set three explicit emissive materials, one on the red, one on the green, and then one on the sign itself. And by doing that, you can see that it's added a nice glow in here. So the default out of the library is not to have the emissive materials on. Let's just borrow the materials from that existing gas can, and let's take a look at the difference. So I'm going to use the material eyedropper. I'm going to click on the red portion. Let's come over here, click on the red portion over here, and you'll notice that the red is now glowing. It's using the exact same material, which is set to have an emissive value. If I repeat that same process, I'll grab the green from the top, apply it onto the top, and then one more, we'll grab the sign and apply it to this sign, and now you see we're getting more light added into the scene. Now I've done all of this in 3D, and just like placing a light in 3D, it will automatically be turned on in the specific light set. If I click on the gas pump, notice in the lower Edit menu is the Off button. That will turn off this specific light source for that light set. You can see how it's now dimmed. The light needs to be turned on, and when I created the emissive materials, there were three specific emissive materials, the red, green, and then the sign itself. They either need to be all on or all off. And you can either go into the Adjust Materials dialog, or you can click on the object, come down into your lower Edit menu, and then explicitly turn the light on. Again, it needs to be all or nothing for the emissive lights to turn on and off. Let's take a look at this gas pump and other lights in the Adjust Lights dialog. Through the Edit Active view, I'm going to come down underneath the lighting and click on Adjust Lights. In the Adjust Lights dialog, I have this sorted based on room. All my garage lights are showing up in an order. You can sort this based on the count or floor number. In this case, I have it by room. And if we take a look at the gas pump, and let's expand this underneath the Adjust Light, there are three emissive materials, the green, the checkered flag, the sign, and then the dark red. These lights will need to either all be on or all be off. You can do that by unchecking the on button, and then you notice how they X out. If I turn it back on, you'll see the check mark in all of them. For light fixtures, let's scroll down to one of the fluorescent lights. These lights will typically always show the area light in the physically based ray trace view or the clay ray trace view. You can turn these lights on. Let's go ahead and turn this one on. And then if we expand the punctual lights, there's actually three lights. These can be turned on individually. In the ray trace view, If the area light is on, you can see the little check mark right in this area right here for the area lights. Use area lights. If that's turned on, the punctual lights will actually not produce light. It's one or the other. Let's take a look at this a little bit further now that I've turned it on. Let's close these dialogues. So you can see by turning that fluorescent light on, it lessened the impact of the other area lights from the neon signs and other emissive materials. When we take a look at this light fixture, let's double-click, open it up. On the light data panel, here are the 3 punctual lights. They're all turned on. They're set to be a spot. The intensity. You can change the light data for each one of those specific light sources inside of this light. And then when you look at the materials panels, we kind of move over to the materials panel. The surface for the light lens is using a material called lighting white. And if we go in and let's take a look at that material a little bit further by select material. And then it's at the top of the list here. I'm just going to click the edit option. This material, lighting white, is a general material that has an emissivity of 40,000. Below that is the option to apply emissive and color from the lights. And as I close this and we return back into that particular light, the light data is set to be at 500 lumens on each one of those. That means that it will scale the emissivity of the area light to these values. So the emissivity will use the value from the light lumens versus the default value from the material we just looked at. That value can be overridden, and I'll talk about if you want to disconnect that for specialty lights when we go into a different room scene. Even though this has 3 punctual lights, the ray trace view will use the area light in place of this, and that's how you'll get your scene set up using area lights. The advantage of using an area light for this fixture is consistency of light across the entire surface. Let me bring up an example. This light is approximately 8 feet long by 8 inches wide. The 3 punctual lights create specific light points from the fixture that then cast shadows into the room accordingly. It may be a little bit difficult to see here, but the shadows are distinctly visible. Notice in the corners of the room. Using an area light on the glass surface of the fixture applies light across the entire surface for a smooth distribution of light. And this is the advantage area lights offer on fixtures, which may be noticeable on larger types of fixtures. Let's move on and take a look at a different type of a scene. In this kitchen render, I've changed the color of the lighting in the upper cabinets. You see an orange hue in the upper cabinets, a little bit less to the cabinet further away. These lights are deriving the color from that light and using an area light. Let me just click on this cabinet. Let's open up the doors so we can get to that light. So I'll just use this tool called Open Cabinet Doors. And now I can select this light, maybe a little carefully, but let's grab that light. Let's open it up and take a look at the properties. The background gets a little bit fuzzy. On the light panel portion for this rope light, you can see that the added light, the intensity again set to 500 lumens, and then I have the color set to this orange material. If we go over to the materials, you can see that it's using the lighting white. Remember, when we went into select material, the lighting white material is actually using the setting apply emissive and color from the lights. So the area light is going to ignore this information on the 40,000 setting for this emissive material because it's being derived from the light itself, which as we go back to the light data is really the intensity of 500 lumens and this color. So that is where that setting for your lights can be specific to the light fixture. Let's go ahead and cancel out of this. In most cases, that's the way you'll typically treat your lights. You'll set the light up, you'll set the lumens, you'll set the color, and then allow the material to derive it from that light. There may be times wherein you want to override it. If we look at the back of the scene, I've got a series of hoop lights. Sometimes, depending on the size of the light and the intensity, you may want to turn it down a little bit. Let's take a look at how I've disconnected the light value from the material itself. So I'm going to use the Adjust Material Definition. And let's just kind of click on this white area if I can get to it right in here. And in this case, for this light, I made a copy of that lighting white material. I put the value at the end of it, 12K, which matches the emissivity value of 12,000. Now the key to this is the check mark is removed from the Apply Emissive and Color from the light itself. So in this case, the material has been disconnected from the lumens in that light. So if I go back and let's double click on this particular light, you can see that I have the light intensity quite low, 100 lumens. You might ask, well, what's the use case in disconnecting the light value from that material? Sometimes I actually like to design in a standard view, and I don't want the view to get completely washed out. If I switch this camera over to the standard view, let's go ahead and switch the render technique over into the standard view here. The scene is bright, but it's not completely washed out. And possibly, if those hoop lights were set to 1200 lumens, 2000 lumens, it may create a lot of extra light, and in this standard view would be overly washed out. And that way I can get one camera that looks good in a standard render view and looks real good as well in the physically based view. As I switch that back, and that goes through the number of passes. That's the advantage of being able to disassociate the light with the material setting. Let's take a look at one final scene for the last portion of this session. In this bedroom render scene, I want to call out three specific area lights that I'm using. Fireplace, the television screen, and then the vertical rope light that I have over in the doorway as just a placeholder. With the Adjust Material Definition, let's start with the television screen. On the Texture panel, this is a photo that I imported from my cell phone. On the Properties panel, I put just a little bit of emissivity on the television or on the photo to give it a little bit of pop. If we take a look, use the Adjust Material Definition on the fire itself, you can see that I've also done a very slight emissivity on the fireplace. Might make it a little bit darker or greater emissivity if this were an evening scene. Now let's go over and take a look at this vertical rope light and look at the emissivity setting on this. You can see that the property or the material name is called Lighting White 2.5K. That matches the emissive value that I put down here. I made a copy, as we looked at earlier, of the material called Lighting White and then adjusted the emissivity of this. This emissivity value, the larger the surface, you can see that the surface on this rope light not overly large as far as the diameter of it. If that were a larger surface, I would probably increase the emissivity. The larger the object, the smaller the emissivity will be. Emissivity works in the physically based ray trace view. It also works in the clay view. Let's go ahead and switch over to the clay view. You'll notice in the clay view you don't get the images. Sometimes I like to use this view. Maybe clients don't focus on the wood grain material. You don't see the wood grain or the specific colors as much, and maybe allows you to focus on the space. Emissivity is giving you light. Pretty easy to see it coming out of the lamps and the emissivity from the light bulb glass that's inside of those lamps. Let me switch the camera back to the physically based render style. And as the number of passes are resolving on here, the last portion of this session I want to point you to are maybe some of the settings you can look at to optimize your rendering when you're using area lights specifically for interior scenes. I'm going to come up to the Edit Active view. Let's come down to the rendering technique for physically based. The first thing I want to point you to is I have shadows, and raycast shadow is going to give you a little crisper view in there. The ambient occlusion is set to 8%. Not really relevant for the physically based rendering, maybe more appropriate for standard. A few of the other settings that aren't as important, super resolution. If you're on maybe doing a walkthrough or have a real high resolution monitor, 4K plus monitor, 5K, You may want to adjust this. There's a few settings in here that you can adjust to get a little bit more performance out of it. I try to leave mine at 1. My screen is 1920 by 1080 most of the time. And then if we skip down to the lighting, sunlight, and then the adjust lights, notice that for the lights I have a bedroom light set. That means all of the lights that are important to me are turned on in that bedroom set. I don't have it set to be automatic. Adjust sunlight. If we take a peek at the sunlight setting, I have that set to a value pretty small, 500. Again, it depends on the type of scene that you're after. And then finally, some of the camera settings itself. Underneath the rendering technique, I'll click the define option. A few key settings. The exposure, really scene dependent. I'll show you a slide in a moment here with some of the key settings that are target. In this case, the exposure set to 0.25. There is a tone mapping. Tone mapping is the process of taking high dynamic rendering lighting values produced by the rendering and then mapping them to a range of display for your screen. Use ray tracing is turned on. You'll have to make sure that your computer is capable of ray tracing. Opaque bounces, and then transmissive and specular bounces, 3 and 4. You can learn about these settings. Just hit the help option. It will explain that. And then the maximum number of samples, we've changed that beginning in X16. It's changed to a higher number because the rendering has really changed underneath the hood. And then the backdrop intensity, subjective to if you're using a generated sky model, if you're using an overly bright background, again, kind of subjective. And then the very last thing oftentimes I like to do is maybe turn on the hand-drawn lines on top. You can see these edges between the ceiling and the wall right in here. Just a very small setting. And now I'll bring up this slide to show you as we kind of part here. This slide for settings is only a guideline, can be very subjective depending on your scenes. Let's recap from the previous cameras we looked at. Raycast shadows on, use a light set. That way you can control your lighting specifically. Ambient occlusion, not relevant for the PBR ray trace views. Sun, typically a range, a low value in the evening, higher value during the day. Backdrop image, good idea, or you can also use a generated sky. In the technique options for the camera, an exposure of 0.3, make sure ray tracing is turned on. Opaque bounce is set at 3, transmissive and specular at 4, max samples at 350, and then the backdrop intensity, again pretty subjective here, a range on the very low level at 1K up to 75K. Again, all of these settings are a guideline and subjective to the specific scene that you have. Well, that wraps up this session on area lights for 3D rendering. Thanks for watching, and I hope you create some great renders.